The night air over the Taiwan Strait was unnervingly still, almost still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Neon lights flickered across the cities, reflections dancing over glass facades that normally buzzed with life. At 3:14 a.m., every electrical network, every computer, every radar installation suddenly screamed static. Taiwan did not notice the first strike. It was invisible, a ghost weaving through fiber optic cables and satellites. Command centers lit with sudden alarms, their red glows illuminating the worried faces of officers who had only slept an hour before. In Beijing, in a similarly darkened room, officers watched multiple feeds, their hands hovering over consoles, waiting for confirmation. The plan had been perfected over years, tested in simulations, debated in closed meetings, and now it moved like a predator across the Pacific. On the streets below, civilians slept unaware, their lives about to be upended in ways they could not imagine. The first missiles rose quietly from hidden silos along the Chinese coastline, their infrared trails invisible to ordinary observers, but glaringly visible to satellite trackers. Taiwan's early warning system screamed, but by then the first wave had already targeted radars, communication nodes, and command centers. Airfields went dark as precision strikes disabled lighting systems, grounding aircraft in a matter of seconds. The world outside woke only to hear the distant thunder of explosions, an ominous prelude to a war. No one wanted but could not prevent. Soldiers, trained for decades, scrambled from bunkers, vaulting into jets that threatened to collapse under the pressure of sudden launch. Anti-missile units fired into the sky blindly, their operators trying to discern friend from foe's drones, some small as insects, others sleek and deadly, traced paths overhead. The first naval movements rippled across the strait. Chinese ships assumed blockade positions. With deadly precision, their radar sweeping the horizon, identifying targets, prioritizing threats. Submarines submerged in the shadows, their hulls slicing silently beneath waves, carrying nuclear-capable payloads that could shift the balance of global power in a heartbeat. Meanwhile, civilians in Taipei and Kaohsiung awoke to an eerie silence broken by alarm sirens wailing, their tones carrying the weight of inevitable chaos. The president of Taiwan was already in the bunker beneath the presidential palace, monitoring feeds that showed shadows of incoming missiles over the strait. Her advisors whispering scenarios that no human being should have to consider. Intelligence. Reports flooded in, confirming the precision of attacks. No cities targeted yet. Only military installations, yet the fear in every heartbeat was palpable. Across the island, volunteer militias and reserve forces mobilized, gathering in school gyms, converted warehouses, and empty parking lots, clutching rifles they had trained with but never used. Schools had been converted into emergency shelters overnight, with civilians stacking water, food, and blankets in anticipation of what was coming. Cyberattacks continued to ripple across. Government network spanking, utilities, transport all compromised. Taiwan's command, accustomed to simulations, now faced reality, struggling to coordinate in a network under attack, systems failing, alarms screaming, drones flying overhead. Within minutes, air bases were on fire, runways shredded. Radar dishes smoking, yet pilots and soldiers refused to surrender, improvising under the pressure of near-perfect planning by the aggressor. Chinese command watched as chaos unfolded exactly as intended, but every commander knew the first hours would determine the psychological battle before any physical confrontation escalated. Civilians tried to flee toward coastlines, hoping evacuation ships would depart before the sea itself became a battlefield. The U.S. Navy, monitoring satellite feeds, immediately repositioned its carrier strike groups, moving them into range. while submarines slipped quietly into the deep. Their presence invisible but deadly, Beijing's leadership calculated global response an intricate dance of military precision, political brinkmanship, and timing down to minutes, yet unknown variables always existed in war. Taiwan's air defense scrambled jets, launching waves into the night sky, chasing shadows while dodging precision missiles, their radar signatures cluttered by decoys, electronic warfare, and fog. By R2, the first ships of the Chinese Navy established semi-permanent blockade patterns, isolating ports, cutting off supply chains, and enforcing control over major shipping lanes. International news networks scrambled to confirm what was happening, but with cyber attacks crippling communications, reporting lagged hours behind events unfolding in real time. Panic began to spread among civilians. But martial discipline and early warning systems prevented total chaos, guiding people toward shelters, bunkers, and evacuation routes. Every decision made in these first hours by leaders, soldiers, and civilians alike would amplify consequences for the next 72 hours. Taiwan's elite cyber defense teams attempted counterattacks, fighting invisible battles against Chinese intrusions, each second critical to maintain infrastructure and communications for the nation. Back in Beijing, generals watched every node of attack unfold, their confidence tempered by the unpredictability of human reaction under stress, even in a meticulously rehearsed operation. As missiles streaked through the skies, some intercepted, some landing with terrifying precision. The psychological impact was undeniable. Fear became a weapon alongside bombs and bullets. In Taipei, emergency sirens gave way to machine-like coordination, civilian evacuations, military redeployments, and command chains functioning at maximum capacity despite network failures. Simultaneously, the strait itself became a chessboard. Every vessel, submarine, and aircraft was a piece in a deadly game where one wrong move could trigger escalation beyond the island. The first hour had shown the world. War is not measured in headlines or propaganda, it is measured in seconds, in decisions made while the earth shakes beneath your feet. By the time the sun began to rise over the horizon, smoke and fire painted the Taiwanese skyline with surreal colors. Reflecting the gravity of the first 12 hours, pilots returned to damaged runways, engineers worked under fire to repair communications, and commanders prepared for the next stage, the escalation that would define the rest of the 72-hour scenario. Somewhere in a quiet room in Washington, the president and his advisors watched, calculating response times, engagement rules, and global diplomacy, all under the pressure of events already unfolding faster than any human mind could comprehend. The clock ticked relentlessly, and every tick brought the world closer to decisions that could change history. Dawn broke over the Taiwan Strait, but the light revealed only smoke, fire, and the aftermath of the first missile strikes. Civilian rooftops were shattered, streets filled with scattered debris, and the echo of explosions lingered in every corner. Emergency broadcast systems struggled to stay online, as power grids flickered under the relentless assault of cyber warfare. Taiwanese pilots regrouped at hidden airstrips, checking aircraft damaged in the opening strikes, preparing for counterattacks despite limited visibility and communications across the strait. Chinese fighter jets maintained a high-altitude patrol, their radar screens glowing green with moving dots representing targets and intercepts. Naval movements intensified, with destroyers and frigates repositioning to enforce the blockade more strictly, cutting off any possible reinforcements from the outside. Submarines moved stealthily beneath the waves, carrying cruise missiles and intelligence-gathering drones, their presence invisible but omnipresent, striking fear into both military and civilian planners. Taiwan's command center, though battered, coordinated air defenses with precision. launching anti-ship missiles against approaching Chinese vessels while simultaneously sending scrambled drone swarms. Into contested airspace, civilians ran through underground tunnels, stairwells, and subway stations. Their hurried movements a stark contrast to the calculated military maneuvers above them. Satellite feeds showed city after city in partial blackout, as emergency power systems kept hospitals and shelters functional. Just enough to prevent total panic, the world began to notice. International news tickers reported unconfirmed attacks, while intelligence agencies scrambled to understand the speed and coordination of the assault. The U.S. carrier strike groups repositioned into defensive formations, tracking Chinese naval units and recalculating engagement distances in real time. Taiwanese cyber forces launched counter-intrusions, attempting to regain control of communications, banking, and military networks, while Chinese cyber units scrambled to reinforce their attacks. Over the skies, fighter jets collided in intense dogfights, missiles streaking through smoke and clouds, flares lighting the horizon in surreal streaks of red and white. Commanders on both sides assessed losses, recalculated strategies, and considered the unpredictable human factor fear, courage. Hesitation all amplified under the pressure of war. Every second mattered, every decision was magnified. One misfire could trigger escalation beyond control. One misstep could cost thousands of lives. Chinese naval formations deployed entire defenses in overlapping patterns, anticipating air attacks from Taiwan's remaining aircraft and allied surveillance planes. In Taipei, emergency services directed civilians into bunkers and makeshift shelters, while volunteer militias manned checkpoints, streets, and defensive positions, communication lines. Though partially disrupted, enabled some coordination between ground units and the few active air defense batteries. A fragile lifeline in a sea of chaos. Drone swarms from both sides filled the airspace, buzzing like a swarm of mechanical hornets, each carrying reconnaissance sensors, explosive payloads, or electronic warfare jammers. Intelligence analysts traced trajectories, projected impact zones, and calculated likely next moves while all the while. Civilians ran through streets with no sense of time, only instinct. The first confirmed civilian casualties were reported, bringing a grim reality into sharp focus. No war is surgical. Every attack carries human cost. Back in Beijing, generals adjusted targeting priorities, responding to unexpected Taiwanese countermeasures, demonstrating a balance of calculated aggression and strategic caution. Across the strait, Taiwan's army moved reserve troops into defensive positions, digging in wherever possible, utilizing terrain to offset numerical disadvantages. Supply chains were disrupted, warehouses emptied, fuel reserves guarded, ammunition rationed. Every logistic calculation critical to survival and counterattack. In Washington, emergency war rooms convened, satellite imagery and intercepted communications feeding into rapid strategic assessments whether to intervene directly, provide intelligence, or hold back in a delicate balancing act. Meanwhile, on the ground, soldiers and civilians alike improvised, transforming everyday objects into defensive tools. Barricades and weapons, blending ingenuity with desperation. Hospitals overflowed, with medical personnel improvising triage systems, treating trauma without the benefit of fully functioning equipment. Moving from room to room as electricity flickered and emergency generators sputtered, defense units fired anti-missile systems, sometimes successfully, sometimes failing. As each engagement became a game of timing, probability, and human nerves under pressure, civilian boats attempted evacuation along less contested coasts, navigating minefields, submarine patrols, and missile trajectories. their crews balancing bravery with near-impossible calculations of survival. By R-24, the first wave of counterattacks began. Taiwanese missiles struck at Chinese staging areas, damaging ships and military depots, signaling that the defenders were not only alive, but determined. Beijing's leadership reacted swiftly, ordering retaliatory strikes, deploying additional air squadrons, and activating naval reinforcements to protect the integrity of the blockade. Cyber warfare escalated. Power grids went down, communication satellites were temporarily jammed, and electronic countermeasures created confusion in both civilian and military networks. Each side's forces began to realize the battle was no longer only physical, it was psychological. Every second of hesitation, every intercepted message, every unexpected countermeasure shaped the unfolding narrative. Civilians watched news feeds, where images of smoke, fire, and explosions dominated, while online social media circulated rumors, panic, and first-hand accounts, fueling tension and uncertainty across the globe. And all the while, civilians, soldiers, analysts, and world leaders understood the stakes. The next day could determine the outcome not just for Taiwan, but for the geopolitical balance of Asia and the world. The sun rose higher, casting pale light over the Taiwan Strait, but the morning offered no relief, only smoldering ruins and smoke that blurred the horizon. Soldiers moved through streets littered with debris, broken glass crunching beneath boots as they checked buildings, cleared unexploded ordnance, and established defensive perimeters. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning fuel, charred metal, and the faint metallic tang of blood, reminders that no precision strike spares the innocent. Taiwanese command centers, partially restored, buzzed with activity. Officers analyzed incoming intelligence, satellite images, and reports from the field, seeking patterns in the chaos. On the opposite coast, Chinese command posts observed the unfolding reality, noting both the successes of the initial assault and the surprising resilience of Taiwanese forces. The civilian population had adapted to the new normal. Schools, factories, and offices were abandoned, replaced with emergency shelters, supply depots, and impromptu defense lines. Drone swarms continued to fill the skies, mapping every movement, relaying live video feeds to commanders on both sides, creating a battlefield where information flowed as rapidly as bullets. In Taipei, the president convened a war council, surrounded by military advisors and cyber experts, each presenting fragmented data, each aware that misinformation could be as deadly as missiles. The strait itself had become a dangerous maze. Chinese destroyers and frigates enforced blockade lines, while submarines prowled beneath, monitoring every naval movement, every signal, every attempt at supply or evacuation. Taiwanese anti-ship missiles struck with surgical precision at vessels attempting to breach the blockade, creating fiery explosions that lit the early morning haze with orange flames and black smoke. Pilots, exhausted yet determined, launched sorties from hastily repaired airstrips, their aircraft darting through enemy radar zones, sometimes intercepted, sometimes returning with vital intelligence on enemy positions. Cyber warfare escalated. Taiwanese systems struggled to maintain connectivity as Chinese hackers sought to compromise satellite communications, air traffic control, and critical infrastructure simultaneously. Civilian volunteers organized into emergency response teams, transporting food, water, and medical supplies to shelters while guiding the injured away from dangerous zones. Every street corner, bridge, and tunnel became a tactical point. Civilians and soldiers alike improvising barricades, sniper positions, and hidden observation posts to monitor enemy movement. Chinese special forces attempted covert infiltration, landing at isolated coastal points, but met with prepared defensive teams, ambushes, and improvised explosive devices. Naval engagements intensified, missiles streaking across the sky, radar systems pinging rapidly, sonar detecting submarines maneuvering silently beneath the waves. Taiwan's cyber teams, now operating in darkened, shielded rooms, launched counterattacks, regaining control of essential networks and turning some of the enemy's digital weapons back on themselves. At 54 hours into the assault, the first humanitarian corridors were attempted, ships carrying supplies navigating through contested waters, relying on both stealth and carefully negotiated temporary ceasefires. Across the island, communications were partially restored. Field commanders coordinated with Central Command to reinforce weakened positions, rotate troops, and plan counter-strikes against advancing forces. Psychological warfare became as crucial as missiles. The dissemination of misinformation, targeted propaganda, and visible displays of resilience seemed to demoralize opposing soldiers while bolstering civilian morale. In Beijing, analysts reviewed live satellite feeds showing Taiwanese defensive adjustments, anticipating counterattacks, and recalculating resource allocations to maintain pressure across multiple fronts. Anti-aircraft units engaged relentlessly, creating a sky full of streaking tracer lines, explosions, and flares, a deadly ballet of steel, fire, and strategy. Taiwanese engineers repaired critical infrastructure under fire, bridges patched, power generators restored, water treatment plants protected from sabotage, all while remaining under constant threat of missile strike. Civilians adapted to the ongoing chaos, navigating streets using underground passages, coordinating with local authorities, and improvising communication methods to share real-time warnings. International observers documented the conflict, sending cautious reports while diplomats debated responses, trade embargoes, and the risk of direct military involvement by allies. By the 60th hour, both sides had incurred losses, ships sunk, aircraft destroyed, infrastructure damaged, but the conflict had yet to reach its most critical and decisive moments. The psychological toll was evident: fatigue, fear, and adrenaline shaped decisions, both reckless and brilliant, as soldiers and commanders responded to rapidly changing conditions. As night fell on the third day, the island glowed with fires, searchlights, and the occasional flash of missile launches, the 72-hour mark approaching, with every side knowing that survival, strategy, and timing were all that mattered. Taiwanese forces fortified positions, anticipating the next wave, balancing defense with limited counteroffensive strikes designed to disrupt enemy coordination. Chinese forces, confident in numerical and technological superiority, continued their calculated pressure, yet increasingly aware of the unforeseen resilience of Taiwan's military and civilians alike. The first true test of morale came: the willingness of soldiers to continue under extreme stress, the courage of civilians to remain, and the leader's ability to maintain command amidst chaos. Both sides had learned in 3 days that war is not just about weapons, it is about timing, improvisation, and the human capacity to endure, adapt, and survive. Taiwanese units reinforced key positions, establishing overlapping fields of fire across choke points, bridges, and coastal inlets to slow the advancing Chinese forces. Anti-ship batteries launched precision missiles, striking vessels attempting to breach the blockade, while coastal radar units relayed real-time targeting data to commanders. Drone swarms hovered overhead, relaying live feeds, jamming enemy communications, and conducting reconnaissance in areas too dangerous for human patrols on the mainland. Chinese generals reassessed deployment strategies, logistics disrupted by Taiwan's precision, Strikes and the ingenuity of defenders forced adjustments to both naval and air operations. Submarines shifted silently beneath the waves, prepared to intercept supply lines and reconnaissance vessels, while surface fleets moved in tight formations to prevent ambushes. Civilians continued to play a critical role transporting supplies, evacuating the wounded, and establishing barricades in streets to slow enemy movement. Hospitals operated under extreme conditions, triaging casualties with limited electricity, staff, and supplies, the medical teams improvising solutions under the shadow of air raids. Taiwanese air defense units fired non-stop, tracking and neutralizing incoming missiles, even as some struck their targets, leaving plumes of smoke that marked both destruction and resistance. On the Strait, naval engagements intensified missile launches, radar-guided countermeasures, and fast patrol boats moving unpredictably created a dangerous cat-and-mouse game. Fighter jets engaged in high-speed dogfights, streaking across the sky. Flares and smoke trails illuminating the chaos below as pilots dodged missiles and tracked enemy. Aircraft, Taiwanese forces, though outnumbered, adapted to every new assault, leveraging knowledge of terrain, fortified positions, and quick improvisation to maintain defensive lines. Communications remained fragmented. Commandos relied on short-wave radios, secure messaging, and runners to transmit critical orders in real time across multiple fronts. Psychological warfare was in full effect. Leaflets, broadcasts, and intercepted messages created tension, fear, and uncertainty on both sides, influencing morale and decisions. The fourth day highlighted the growing importance of logistics resupply efforts, fuel, ammunition, and medical aid determined which units could hold positions and which would collapse. Underground tunnels and hidden pathways became lifelines for civilians and troops, allowing movement without detection and enabling surprise counterattacks in urban areas. Both sides recognized the fragile balance of power. Small mistakes, misfires, or miscalculations could result in catastrophic losses. Satellite feeds captured the eerie contrast of calm city streets now turned into death zones, with smoke rising in columns like silent alarms to the world above. Intelligence units monitored enemy maneuvers relentlessly, adjusting defensive patterns, planning ambushes, and prioritizing critical targets to slow the offensive. As the sun set on the fourth day, the night sky became a canvas of tracer rounds, flares, and distant explosions, casting a surreal glow over an island fighting for survival. Civilian militias worked tirelessly, manning checkpoints, clearing rubble, and coordinating with military units to maintain order and resist infiltration. Taiwanese cyber forces launched retaliatory strikes, targeting command and control networks, temporarily blinding Chinese units and delaying missile guidance systems, naval mines, previously hidden in strategic channels, detonated as unsuspecting ships passed, further complicating Chinese plans and showcasing Taiwan's ingenuity in asymmetric defense. The fourth day proved that the conflict was no longer solely about technology or firepower. It was a test of endurance, human resolve, and rapid adaptation under pressure. Priority 4. Both sides understood that the war's trajectory depended not on initial strikes but on the capacity to sustain operations, maintain morale, and outthink the opponent in real time. Leaders calculated risks with precision. Each decision weighed with the knowledge that one wrong move could escalate the battle into a far larger confrontation. Civilian networks, underground communications, and volunteer intelligence provided crucial information that shaped defensive maneuvers, highlighting the role of every citizen in the survival of the island. As darkness fell, Taiwan prepared for the inevitable reinforcements, counterattacks, and the next wave of conflict. fully aware that the first 72 hours had already rewritten expectations of modern warfare. The fifth day broke over Taiwan with a pale, grey sky, casting long shadows over shattered streets and smoldering rooftops. The city caught between survival and total chaos. Command centers, barely intact, buzzed with activity. Generals and officers analyzed the data from the past 96 hours, their faces taut with exhaustion and determination. Taiwanese forces rotated units, reinforcing frontline positions while planning daring counterattacks to reclaim key neighborhoods and strategic infrastructure lost during the initial assault. And airship batteries remained vigilant, tracking vessels attempting to slip through the blockade. Every radar ping a heartbeat that could decide life or death. The strait had become a deadly chessboard, fast attack craft, submarines and aerial drones creating a web of unpredictability, where every move could trigger catastrophic consequences. On the ground, street fighting intensified. Barricades became fortresses. Snipers hidden in ruined buildings controlled key intersections, and ambushes were executed with precision honed by necessity. Civilian volunteers, now battle-hardened, assisted in medical triage, reconnaissance, and logistics, their determination a force multiplier for the defending army. Drones streaked across the skies, scanning for enemy positions, relaying live feeds, and occasionally intercepting incoming munitions, providing a critical technological edge to the island's defense. Fighter jets engaged in near-constant sorties, dodging surface-to-air missiles, intercepting bombers, and striking key supply lines, the aerial theater as deadly as the ground below. Cyber warfare escalated. Taiwanese hackers exploited vulnerabilities in Chinese networks, temporarily disrupting targeting systems, creating openings for tactical strikes, and keeping the enemy guessing. Human cost became visible in every street and alley. Injured civilians and soldiers moved under cover, their resilience a silent defiance against the advancing forces. Leaders on both sides calculated risks with surgical precision, understanding that every misstep could escalate the conflict beyond Taiwan. Drawing in international powers, explosions echoed across the island as missiles, artillery shells, and improvised defenses collided, leaving craters, fires, and a sense of unpredictability in their wake. Civilian shelters became hubs of resistance, with makeshift communications, first aid stations, and supply depots all operating under the constant threat of bombardment. Taiwanese engineers repaired critical infrastructure under fire power grids, communication lines, and water systems, ensuring that command, control, and logistics remained functional despite relentless attacks. Chinese forces pushed forward methodically, yet each advance was met with asymmetric tactics, roadblocks, hidden snipers, and improvised explosives that slowed the offensive and inflicted mounting losses. Naval engagements continued with high stakes. Missiles streaked across the water. Ships maneuvered in chaotic patterns, and submarines tracked every movement below the waves. Drone strikes, cyber sabotage, and guerrilla-style attacks disrupted supply chains, forcing Chinese forces to adapt on the fly while Taiwanese forces exploited every weakness. Psychological warfare intensified broadcasts, intercepted communications, and propaganda aimed to weaken morale on both sides, while civilians and soldiers clung to resolve and hope. As dusk approached, the island's defenders executed a coordinated counteroffensive, retaking critical positions, forcing Chinese units to withdraw temporarily, and demonstrating the resilience of an underdog fighting for survival. Communications lines, partially restored, allowed field commanders to relay real-time intelligence, coordinate strikes, and anticipate enemy maneuvers with greater accuracy. Firefights raged across urban and rural areas alike. Every street corner, bridge, and tunnel became a tactical point, the train itself a weapon for those who knew it best. Civilian and military coordination proved decisive. Volunteers guided troops, shared information, and maintained morale in the midst of chaos, blurring the line between soldier and citizen. Naval bombardments and aerial strikes continued. Yet Taiwan's defensive ingenuity and adaptive strategies caused disproportionate disruption to the enemy's plans. The fifth day marked the end of the first 72 hours of the war. In spirit and intensity, the island had survived the initial shock, inflicted significant damage, and showcased extraordinary resilience. Both sides paused briefly, assessing losses, recalculating strategy, and preparing for the next phase. The battle had proven that technology, numbers, and firepower alone could not guarantee victory. Taiwanese forces had leveraged intelligence, terrain, improvisation, and human spirit to resist overwhelming odds, forcing the invaders to acknowledge that every step forward would come at high cost. As night fell, fires burned across the island, tracer rounds streaked the sky, and the hum of drones continued overhead, a grim reminder that the war was far from over. Yet Taiwan's first 72 hours had defied expectations. Leadership, courage, and resilience had defined the early days of the conflict, moments that would shape the course of the war, the strategy of both nations, and the stories of those who survived. The island breathed, wounded but unbroken, as commanders on both sides prepared for what would come next, aware that the human spirit, as much as military might, would determine the future.